What makes a mother? Is it blood, instinct, or the courage to love what isn't yours? If you were given a second chance at family, but risked heartbreak all over again, would you take it? Stay with this story, because what happens in a snowy rescue center in Montana will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loss, and the wildest acts of kindness. The wind howled through Peaceful Valley Rescue Center, pushing brittle pine branches against the chain-link fences and scattering old snow into ghostly drifts. In the deep woods of Montana, late winter felt endless, a season for survivors, not the weak. On mornings like this, silence clung to the rescue center like a shroud, interrupted only by distant caws and the metallic snap of locks being checked by a gloved hand. It was on one such frigid morning, beneath a pale sky, that Emma arrived. She was a bobcat, 7 years old, fur matted with blood, wild eyes flickering with pain and confusion. A highway worker had spotted her dragging herself along the snowy shoulder, refusing to give in to the numbing cold or the agony blazing through her shattered pelvis. It took 2 hours and 3 volunteers to coax her into the crate, her growls echoing with the rage and terror of a wild thing cornered. At the center, the decision was supposed to be simple. Most places would have put Emma down. The x-rays showed a pelvis so broken she'd never hunt again, never leap, never chase, never have kittens. For a wild bobcat, that was a death sentence. Ben Miller, the center's director, stood at the window, his face shadowed by tough choices and years of compromise. He was a good man, but he'd seen what happened when you let your heart decide in a world that demanded numbers and pragmatism. "We can't save them all, Liv," Ben said, his voice low, as the vet tech Olivia Grant held Emma's trembling body, speaking softly, her eyes full of unshed tears. "She's still fighting," Olivia whispered, ignoring the chill that seeped through her scrubs. "Just look at her, Ben. She's not done yet. She's got something left." Ben shook his head, but the board's vote came and went, and, against the odds, they chose to let Emma stay. Maybe it was the way she refused to close her eyes, even as the tranquilizer made her world blur and fade. Maybe it was Olivia's stubborn faith, or maybe the board needed a story of hope to tell donors tired of grim endings. Either way, Emma was given a place in the sanctuary. Not as a mother, not as a wild thing, but as a living remnant of what the world took and what a few good people tried to give back. But hope here didn't come easy. Emma's enclosure was set away from the others, a wire rectangle overlooking a stand of bare aspens and distant blue hills. The ground was crusted with old snow, and at night, the temperature dropped so low you could hear the wood in the observation shed creak like old bones. Volunteers whispered that Emma's spirit had broken along with her bones, that she was a ghost haunting the edges of her own life. She limped from corner to corner, her gait twisted, never letting anyone near. Sometimes in the hours before dawn, Olivia would sit outside the fence, her breath frosting on the air, just to keep Emma company. She'd read out loud, old novels, news stories, even grocery lists, anything to fill the silence. But Emma's ears barely flicked. She would lie in the farthest corner, yellow eyes fixed on the woods beyond the fence, as if daring them to come closer. Winter crawled by. Other animals came and went. A trio of fox kits, fat with spring, found new homes in the wild. Injured raptors healed and flew again. But Emma remained, a permanent resident. A symbol, some said, of misplaced charity. To others, she was a reminder that the line between wild and tame was thinner than anyone wanted to believe. One night, a storm blew in off the mountains, rattling the windows and driving the staff to huddle around space heaters, swapping stories to keep the cold at bay. Olivia stepped out, cradling a thermos of soup, determined to check on Emma one more time before bed. She found the bobcat crouched by the fence, nose pressed to the mesh, watching the swirling snow. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. In Emma's gaze, Olivia saw not gratitude, not even fear, but a fierce, aching loneliness. She realized then that survival wasn't enough. Emma had lost more than her wildness. She'd lost her place in the world. Without a territory, without a family, what was left for a bobcat but to haunt the edge of existence? But inside that battered body, the old wild heart beat on. Olivia swore she could feel it through the cold steel wire, a stubborn pulse refusing to surrender. And in that moment, under the howl of the winter wind, a question was born. Could Emma ever find her way back to a life worth living? Or was she fated to remain a shadow, a legend of loss in a sanctuary built for second chances? The answer would come, but not in the way anyone expected. The thaw came late that year. When the first hints of spring crept into the woods of Peaceful Valley Rescue Center, they brought more mud than flowers. The rivers swelled with snowmelt, and the center's staff, weary from months of ice and wind, found themselves ankle-deep in slush as they trudged from pen to pen. But with the melt came something far more fragile than hope. 3 tiny lives, barely clinging to this world. It happened on a morning so gray the sun seemed afraid to show its face. A local rancher pulled up to the front gate, his truck spattered with mud, his expression grim. Olivia met him outside, pulling her jacket tighter against the cold. In the bed of the truck was a battered crate, covered by a stained old towel. Inside, huddled in a tangle of limbs and ribs, were 3 bobcat cubs. They didn't look like survivors. Their eyes, meant to blaze gold, were milky and dull, crusted with infection. Their fur was patchy, bellies sunken, limbs trembling from hunger and cold. They didn't even hiss when Olivia reached in, just blinked and shrank deeper into the corner. She found him near the hay shed, the rancher muttered, nodding to his old blue heeler curled in the passenger seat. Mama's nowhere, maybe a coyote, maybe the road. I figured you'd do what you could. In the intake room, Olivia worked fast, hands steady but her heart pounding. Each cub weighed barely 2 pounds. The smallest was just skin and bone, his breath coming in wet rattles. They're half blind, Olivia whispered, running gentle fingers over tiny ribs. Malnourished, terrified. Ben hovered in the doorway, jaw set. We've got protocol for this. We hand raise. We do what we can. He didn't say what everyone knew, that odds were slim. Hand-raising wild cubs was a race against time, infection, and instinct. Most never made it, fading away despite bottles and blankets and round-the-clock care. But Olivia couldn't shake the sight of Emma, alone at the edge of her world. She watched the cubs struggle to swallow formula, tiny claws clutching at empty air, and something wild and desperate flickered in her. We could try something different, she said quietly, not daring to look Ben in the eye. We could let Emma try. The suggestion hung in the air like a threat. Ben's voice sharpened. Are you serious? She's never had kittens. She's injured. She could hurt them, Liv. Olivia squared her shoulders. Or she could save them. Wild mothers. Sometimes they adopt orphans. There are stories, Ben. Foxes, wolves, even lynx. If there's even a chance, it's not protocol. If she attacks, we lose them all. And maybe Emma, too. Ben's eyes flicked to the camera monitors, where the board could be watching. He was a good man, but years of tight budgets and tragedies had etched caution deep into his bones. Olivia's voice dropped, fierce and pleading. Protocol isn't saving anyone. Not here, not now. Let's just try. The debate split the staff in two. Some, like young Tomas, the new volunteer, argued for caution. What if she's too stressed? What if she rejects them, or worse? Others, watching Olivia cradle the weakest cub and seeing the stubborn set of her jaw, dared to hope. In the end, Ben gave the nod, though it felt more like an admission of defeat than consent. We do this my way. Cameras on, barriers ready. If anything goes wrong, we intervene fast. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation. Olivia set up a small, protected enclosure within Emma's pen, walls low enough for the Bobcat to cross, but tall enough to give the cubs a safe corner. Warm straw was piled high, bottles of formula lined up just in case, and every volunteer was briefed, nerves raw. Finally, the moment came. Olivia carried the crate, heart thudding so hard it drowned out every sound but the wind. Emma watched from her usual corner, eyes narrowed, as the cubs were placed gently into the straw. They curled into a trembling pile, mewling, blind to the world. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Emma stayed perfectly still, her body tense, tail twitching. Her eyes flicked from Olivia to the cubs and back again, calculating. In the staff room, Ben stood frozen over the monitors, hand hovering over the alarm. Then, with a slow, limping gait, Emma crossed the pen. Each step was agony and memory, a wild thing forced to become something new. She circled the pile of cubs, nose quivering, ears flattened against her skull. The cubs whimpered, shrinking from the huge shadow looming above. No one spoke. The only sound was Emma's breath and the frantic, panicked squeaks of the youngest cub. Ben's words echoed in Olivia's head. If this fails, we lose them all. The world seemed to hold its breath. Emma lowered her head. Inches from the smallest cub, nostrils flaring, the cub's whiskers twitched. Emma's tongue flicked out just once, rough and uncertain, over the cub's head. Olivia let out a shuddering breath, tears stinging her eyes. For a heartbeat, hope flickered through the rescue center. A spark in the long Montana winter, a miracle that nobody had dared to believe. But the staff knew. This was only the beginning. The next hours, days, and nights would decide everything. And outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the fence as if the wild itself was watching. From the moment Emma's tongue brushed the smallest cub, everything in Peaceful Valley Rescue Center seemed to slow down. The staff watching from behind the glass didn't dare move. Outside, the wind died, and the whole world pressed its ear to the ground, waiting for what might come next. Emma didn't immediately embrace the cubs, nor did she drive them away. Instead, she circled them slowly, her limp more pronounced with every step, head low, shoulders hunched. Her wild eyes flickered with something raw and uncertain, a mix of memory, pain, and the faintest glimmer of curiosity. It was as if she was searching her own soul for the answer. Was she still capable of caring for something so fragile after so much had been stolen from her? The three cubs huddled in the straw, their bodies shivering with cold and fear. The smallest, still damp from Emma's tentative lick, whimpered, pawing blindly at the air. His siblings pressed in, clinging to each other, unaware of the monumental gamble that had placed them in this silent pen. Every second felt stretched thin, like the surface of a frozen pond, ready to shatter with the wrong move. Olivia stayed by the fence, barely breathing, whispering soft encouragements that only the night could hear. In the observation shed, Ben watched the camera feed with clenched fists, eyes darting from Emma's every movement to the board members' silent faces on the live conference call. Some of the volunteers had left, unable to handle the tension, but a few remained, glued to the monitors, hearts pounding, hoping for a miracle or fearing disaster. For hours, nothing happened. Emma kept her distance, occasionally glancing at the cubs, but never settling beside them. When she limped to the far side of the enclosure, the cubs' cries grew louder, as if begging for comfort, for warmth, for the mother they'd lost, and the one they might still find. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional shifting of straw or the low whir of the camera. Emma paced, ears swiveling to every sound, muscles trembling beneath her battered fur. Sometimes she'd stop and stare at the distant woods beyond the fence, where snow still clung to the blackened branches, and the world she'd once known seemed impossibly far away. Olivia stayed all night, wrapped in a thick coat, refusing to leave the pen's side. She scribbled frantic notes in her journal, documenting every twitch, every sound, every heartbreak. At one point, she pressed her palm to the cold wire mesh, willing Emma to feel her hope through the metal barrier. "You can do this," she whispered, voice shaking. "They need you. You need them." Inside, Emma finally crept closer to the cubs, her head tilted, nose working the air. She sniffed them one by one, sometimes recoiling, sometimes lingering. The largest cub tried to nuzzle her paw, and for a terrifying second, Emma tensed, claws flexing. Olivia's breath caught in her throat, and Ben's hand hovered over the intercom. But Emma didn't lash out. Instead, she pulled away and retreated to a corner, curling into herself. The cubs whimpered, restless, lost. The hours dragged on. Staff changed shifts, coffee grew cold, and the Montana night deepened, quiet as a confession. Around 3 a.m., the smallest cub began to cry out, his voice thin and ragged. The sound cut through Emma's stupor like a blade. She lifted her head, eyes glowing in the faint moonlight that spilled through the enclosure. Slowly, haltingly, Emma stood. She hobbled across the pen, each step heavy with doubt and longing. She lowered herself next to the pile of cubs, her body trembling as she sniffed them once more. Then, almost reluctantly, she leaned in and licked the smallest cub again, gentler this time. The cub quieted, his breathing slowing as he burrowed against her fur. The staff watching on the monitors exhaled in unison, the tension in the room breaking like a fever. Olivia let herself cry, hot tears running down her cheeks, as Emma curled around the cubs, not fully embracing them, but not leaving them either. It was a beginning, fragile, imperfect, but real. Through the rest of the night, Emma kept vigil. She didn't sleep, nor did Olivia. Each time a cub whimpered, Emma would nudge it gently with her nose, or offer a hesitant lick. She watched them with a wary protectiveness, her own needs set aside for the first time since the accident. Outside, the snow softened under the first touch of dawn, and the rescue center seemed to breathe easier. By morning, the news had spread through the staff like wildfire. People came quietly to the observation shed, staring in disbelief at the sight on the screen. Emma, battered and scarred, keeping watch over 3 orphaned cubs. Some dared to hope, others feared the calm was just the eye of a coming storm. But for now, a tentative peace had settled over the pen. Later, Ben found Olivia sitting on the ground outside Emma's enclosure, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but glowing with hope. He handed her a mug of coffee, his own voice soft for the first time in days. "I'll admit it," he said, staring through the wire at Emma and the cubs. "I didn't think she had it in her." Olivia nodded, wiping her face. Neither did she, not until now. In that breathtaking silence beneath the pale Montana sky, something old and wounded began to heal. Emma had made her choice, and for the first time in a long while, the world seemed to hold its breath. Not in fear, but in awe of the impossible. The Montana dawn crept slowly over Peaceful Valley Rescue Center, its pale gold rays filtering through snow-frosted trees and painting the world in soft promise. But inside Emma's enclosure, the promise felt fragile, like the thin crust of ice on the pond, easily shattered by one wrong step. After the long, tense night, staff gathered quietly at the observation shed, drawn by the miracle and the uncertainty of what they had witnessed. Emma was curled in the straw, her body a living wall around the cubs. They pressed into her side, nuzzling for warmth and something older than memory. Olivia hadn't left all night. She sat cross-legged in the cold, back against the fence, blanket draped over her shoulders. The moment felt too precious to interrupt. She watched as Emma shifted, tail twitching when one cub squirmed under her belly. With each movement, the doubt flickered in Olivia's mind. Could this hold? Would instinct win out over pain and loss? Or was this only a brief truce before Emma retreated again into her own sorrow? Emma wasn't fully at ease. Her eyes never left the corners of the pen, scanning for threats. When the youngest cub whimpered, Emma would freeze, every muscle tense. Sometimes she flinched from their touch. Yet when one small paw pressed against her scarred side, Emma didn't move away. Instead, she lowered her head, breath stirring the straw, and waited. Across the yard, Ben checked his watch and paced. The entire rescue center felt the strain. Volunteers whispering in the hallway, interns arguing over whether this was a triumph or a disaster waiting to unfold. Even the board, usually distant, was watching via remote cameras, hungry for proof that Peaceful Valley's reputation would be lifted by this act of wild mercy. Mid-morning brought the first real test. A cub, emboldened by hunger, tried to climb over Emma's haunch, mewling and clumsy. Emma shifted, baring her teeth. Not in a snarl, but a warning. The cub froze, tiny heart hammering, and the staff collectively sucked in their breath. Emma turned, eyes meeting Olivia's through the glass, and for a moment, everything hung in balance. Then, slowly, as if making peace with the memory of her own lost wildness, Emma licked the cub's ear, rough but careful. The cub squeaked and nestled closer. Olivia pressed a hand to her mouth, a laugh of relief slipping out. The staff began documenting everything. Olivia filled pages in her battered blue notebook, the exact minute Emma allowed the cubs to crawl over her back, the way she tolerated their sharp milk teeth on her fur, the moments of hesitation when she'd stare into the woods, lost in memory. Ben reviewed hours of video footage, looking for signs, good or bad, that might predict what would come next. He scheduled team meetings, insisting everyone have a say, even the youngest interns. But outside the center, the story began to ripple through the rescue community. Someone leaked a video clip to social media, a shaky zoom on Emma curled around the cubs, the night vision lens turning her eyes to white embers. Comments flooded in, most hopeful, some scathing. "Projecting human emotions on wild animals is dangerous," one post declared. "What's next? Therapy sessions for cougars?" Others were captivated. "This is the kind of story the world needs. If a broken bobcat can love again, maybe we all can." The center's email inbox filled with questions from rival sanctuaries and wildlife experts. Some demanded details of the protocol. Others accused Peaceful Valley of risking animal welfare for publicity. Ben bristled at the criticism, but Olivia remained steadfast, arguing that what mattered most was what was happening in the straw right now, not what strangers online believed. Each day, Olivia stayed late by the enclosure, whispering encouragement through the wire. Some nights, she played recordings of bobcat mothers purring, hoping the sound would reach something buried in Emma's heart. There were setbacks. One afternoon, the largest cub nipped at Emma's bad hip, and she yowled in pain, sending all three scattering. Emma paced the enclosure for hours after, refusing to let them near. Ben's skepticism hardened with every incident. In meetings, he pressed Olivia, "What if she snaps? What's our plan? If something goes wrong, we lose them all, and our credibility." Olivia's answers came softer each time, doubt creeping in despite her resolve. "I don't know, Ben, but if we don't let her try, we lose them anyway, and Emma loses her last chance at something real." The weight of responsibility pressed on them all. The rescue community, the donors, the silent judgment of the wild outside the fences. Every force seemed poised against this fragile experiment. But inside the pen, a new rhythm was taking hold. Emma's breathing, once shallow and anxious, grew deeper as she slept beside the cubs. The orphans, little by little, learned to trust her warmth, even when her touch was clumsy. One evening, Olivia caught a rare moment on camera. Emma grooming the smallest cub with slow, methodical licks, her eyes half closed. The cub wriggled in delight, rolling onto his back. Olivia uploaded the video to the center's archive, labeling it "First True Embrace." It would be shared and reshared by researchers and animal lovers for years to come. A testament to the raw, uncertain beginnings of a family built not on blood, but on stubborn, desperate hope. Still, the doubts remained, lurking in the cold Montana night. Was this miracle sustainable? Or was it a beautiful illusion, destined to crack beneath the weight of fear, pain, and a world unwilling to believe that broken creatures could save each other? The answers, like the wild, remained unpredictable. The days that followed were anything but peaceful. By the end of the week, the world beyond the snowbound fences of Peaceful Valley Rescue Center had taken notice of Emma and her orphans. The first stories were hopeful, shared by a handful of animal lovers, then by local news. But the internet is a wild thing itself, and hope quickly tangled with anger, skepticism, and debate. In the staff kitchen, the rescue team huddled around a battered laptop, watching their story spiral out of control. Footage of Emma curled around her adopted cubs ran on repeat, but the comment sections underneath turned bitter fast. "This is reckless. You can't force wild animals to play house for a photo op," wrote one wildlife blogger, his post already shared 1,000 times. Projecting human emotions onto predators is dangerous, for them and for the cause. A rival rescue center posted a long critique on social media, tagging Peaceful Valley for the world to see. "Sanctuary isn't a circus," it read. "If this experiment fails, it'll set back Bobcat rescue for a generation. They're gambling with lives for attention." Even in town, word spread. Olivia could feel the eyes on her as she stopped for coffee, whispers and raised eyebrows trailing her like a chill wind. Some neighbors stopped her to say they believed in what she was doing. Others warned her not to get too attached, to the cubs or to hope itself. Inside the center, the staff's nerves frayed under the spotlight. Volunteers argued over feeding schedules and contingency plans. Tomas, usually calm, snapped at another tech for letting the cubs cry too long. Even Ben, who prided himself on staying above the noise, slammed the office door a little harder than usual. But the worst blows came in private. Emails from respected wildlife experts, some threatening to report the center for emotional interference, others accusing Olivia and Ben of endangering the cubs. The board grew anxious, their weekly calls growing longer, questions sharper. "Are we risking everything for a fairy tale?" one member asked, her voice cold and clipped. "What if this ends up on the evening news? For all the wrong reasons?" Ben pushed back, his frustration mounting. We're monitoring everything. If it turns, we have a backup plan. But nobody ever tried this because nobody believed it was possible. That's not a reason to quit now. Olivia fought for patience, but exhaustion gnawed at her edges. She stayed by the enclosure late into every night, documenting Emma's every move, searching for signs of hope, of trouble, of something she could explain to the world. Sometimes, after everyone left, she'd rest her forehead against the cold wire and whisper, "Just a little longer, Em. You're almost there. We're almost there." And for a while, things held steady. Emma grew more confident, allowing the cubs to nestle into her side. The cubs' eyes cleared, and their bellies filled out. The staff dared to hope again. Ben even allowed himself a brief smile when he saw Emma bat at a straw ball, pretending not to notice the cubs pouncing after her. But hope is a fragile thing. One rainy afternoon, just as Olivia was preparing to leave for a much-needed nap, she heard a sound that froze her blood, a thin, broken cry from the far side of the enclosure. She dropped her notebook and ran. The smallest cub, who had always been the weakest, was curled in a miserable ball, shivering. His breath came in short, rattling gasps, and his nose ran with yellow discharge. Emma hovered close, clearly agitated, pawing at the straw but unsure what to do. "Ben!" Olivia called, voice sharp as an alarm. He arrived within seconds, followed by Tomas and another tech. Olivia scooped the cub up, wrapping him in her jacket. He weighed nearly nothing, eyes glazed with fever. "We have to act now," Ben said grimly. "Get him inside, start fluids, antibiotics, move." As Olivia and the medical team rushed the cub to the treatment room, the others watched Emma through the glass. She paced, yowling softly, slamming her body against the fence with a strength that shocked everyone. She searched the straw for her missing cub, calling out in a voice that sounded almost human in its grief. The news hit social media before the crisis team finished their first round of treatment. Someone had seen the commotion, snapped a blurry photo, and posted it. "Breaking, cub falls ill under mother Bobcat's care. #peaceful valley fail." Within hours, the story had exploded. Critics pounced. "See? Proof that Emma was never fit," wrote a famous zoologist, sharing the post to his followers. "Wild animals don't need surrogate moms. They need professionals. This experiment is over." Olivia read the words, her eyes burning. In the quiet of the treatment room, she watched the tiny cub struggle to breathe, feeling the weight of the world press down on her. Emma's cries echoed through the empty hallway, a haunting soundtrack to the battle inside. The staff split further, some calling for the cubs to be pulled and hand-raised immediately, others demanding they stay with Emma, arguing she was doing her best. Ben held the line, but his faith wavered. "We'll monitor through the night," he said, voice raw. "We'll do everything we can. But one more incident, and we pull the plug. I mean it." Olivia sat by the cub's side all night, refusing to leave even for a moment. Outside, Emma pressed her face to the glass, watching with wild, desperate eyes. For the first time, Olivia saw the great cat's mask slip. Emma wasn't just an animal on display. She was a mother, terrified of losing what little she had left. In that moment, the line between human and wild blurred, and the entire rescue center seemed to hold its breath, waiting for dawn and for hope to return. The Montana night pressed in around Peaceful Valley Rescue Center, thick with mist and the distant howl of wolves. Inside, the world narrowed to a circle of light around the treatment table, where Olivia fought for the smallest cub's life. The cub was barely breathing, his tiny chest fluttering with each shallow inhale. Machines beeped softly, monitors tracked heartbeats and oxygen. The air stank of antiseptic and fear. Emma's cries echoed through the empty halls, raw, persistent, impossible to ignore. She paced her enclosure, her body moving with a frantic, wounded rhythm. Each time she threw herself against the wire, the volunteers flinched, fearing she might hurt herself. But she wouldn't be soothed, not by food, not by soft voices. She wanted her cub, and nothing else mattered. Ben stood outside the glass, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd watched rescues succeed and fail before, but never with the whole world watching. The critics were circling, the board demanded updates every hour, and now one sick cub threatened to unravel everything. "We should pull the other cubs now," Tomas said quietly. "If the infection spreads—" "Not yet," Olivia snapped. Exhaustion made her voice sharp. She barely looked up as she stroked the cub's head, coaxing warm formula into his mouth drop by drop. "He's fighting, and so is Emma. If we separate them now, we might lose them all, body and spirit." The team took shifts through the night, but Olivia refused to leave the cub's side. She sang to him, nonsense lullabies and half-remembered hymns from her childhood. At some point, the power flickered, plunging the room into darkness. For a few tense moments, all anyone could hear was the rain pounding on the roof and the cub's faint, rattling breaths. Emma was relentless. She lay pressed against the fence that faced the treatment room, her amber eyes locked on the window, as if sheer willpower could pull her cub back through the walls. Every so often, she let out a low, keening yowl, a sound that twisted Olivia's heart. Toward dawn, the crisis peaked, the cub's temperature soared, and his breathing stuttered. Olivia's hands shook as she adjusted the IV line. Ben entered, his eyes bloodshot, carrying strong coffee and resignation in equal measure. "We're running out of time, Liv." She met his gaze, tears glittering in her eyes, but her jaw set. "We have to try everything. He needs Emma as much as he needs medicine, please. Let's bring her in, just for a moment. Maybe she can help in a way we can't." Ben hesitated. It was risky. Emma, even weakened, was still a wild animal, but the night had stripped away protocol and pride, leaving only a stubborn hope behind. They rigged a barrier, thick plexiglass and steel mesh, so Emma could reach the cub, but not the equipment. Ben unlocked her enclosure, and Olivia led her, step by painful step, down the corridor to the treatment room. Emma's body trembled, but her eyes never wavered from the bundle of towels where her cub lay. The moment the door slid open, Emma surged forward, pressing her nose to the mesh. The sick cub whimpered. Emma licked his tiny head through the opening, slow and deliberate, as if she could will him back to strength. Her purr rumbled, deep, low, and desperate. The cub stilled, his body relaxing, heartbeat slowing as he felt her touch. For the next hour, Emma refused to move. She lay beside the mesh, her massive body curled protectively. Olivia, watching from the far side, felt hope stir inside her for the first time in days. As dawn crept in, painting the snow outside with pale blue light, the cub's breathing evened out. His fever broke. By the time the sun edged above the trees, he had drifted into real sleep, weak but alive. Tears ran down Olivia's face as she whispered, "Thank you, Emma. Thank you." The staff, watching through the glass, burst into applause, quiet, awestruck, and grateful. Even Ben let a shaky laugh escape, relief breaking the tension in his face. They returned Emma to her enclosure, where she slumped down beside the remaining cubs, exhausted but victorious. Olivia stayed to watch, scribbling notes with trembling hands. Emma took the weak cub by the scruff, gently, carefully, and tucked him into her belly, groomed him until he fell asleep. Mothering, not rejecting, saving, not surrendering. Word of the night's miracle traveled fast. By lunchtime, messages of hope began to trickle in, softening the flood of criticism. A renowned wildlife vet emailed Ben directly. Sometimes faith trumps protocol. Don't let the cynics win. Still, not everyone was convinced. Online, the debate raged on, some claiming the recovery was pure luck, others still calling for Emma's removal from the Cubs. But inside Peaceful Valley, faith had been restored. For now, that was enough. Olivia watched the monitors, eyes aching, heart lighter. In the straw, Emma curled around all three cubs, licking the sick one's head, her own body finally relaxing for the first time in days. Ben joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You did good, Liv. So did she." Olivia shook her head. "We did this together. All of us." As the Montana sun broke through the clouds, flooding the sanctuary with gold, something new grew in the spaces between heartbreak and hope, belief. Not just in second chances, but in the wild, unmeasurable magic that happens when you let go of fear and fight for family, no matter the risk. And in the center of it all, Emma watched her cubs breathe, her eyes fierce and full of the kind of love that saves lives, even in the wild. Sunlight filtered through the icy branches, casting shifting shadows across Emma's enclosure. The world beyond Peaceful Valley Rescue Center was still cold and hard, but within the fences, a different season had begun. With the sick cub's recovery, a fragile hope blossomed. For the first time since her arrival, Emma's enclosure wasn't just a place for exile. It was a home, and she was no longer alone. Emma adapted to her new role, with a patience no one expected from a wounded, wild creature. Day after day, Olivia watched from her usual post outside the enclosure, documenting every breakthrough. She saw Emma teach the cubs how to climb, nudging them gently toward the thick tree trunk that had been bolted upright against one wall. At first, the cubs slid and tumbled, yowling with frustration. But Emma never grew irritated. She demonstrated with her own careful motions, slow, deliberate, waiting for the cubs to mimic her. When the cubs became too rough in their play, Emma would issue a firm, guttural chuff, the Bobcat's version of a reprimand. The smallest cub would freeze, then scamper behind her tail for safety. Once, the boldest tried to swat at Emma's ear. In an instant, Emma spun, pinning the cub gently beneath a massive paw, holding him still until he stopped squirming. The lesson was clear. Love meant boundaries as much as warmth. The volunteers, who had once tiptoed past Emma's enclosure, now lingered to watch. They whispered in awe as Emma groomed each cub in turn, her tongue rasping through their patchy fur. The smallest cub, still recovering, became her favorite. She doted on him, curling around him at night, guarding his sleep as the wind rattled the windows. Ben, who had always been the skeptic, found himself visiting the pen more often, arms crossed and a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "I never thought I'd see this," he admitted to Olivia one morning, as Emma rolled in the straw, pretending to snarl at the cub's antics. "I thought she was too broken, but look at her, she's alive." Olivia nodded, her heart swelling with a pride that felt almost parental. "She's more than alive, Ben. She's teaching them everything she knows. She's showing us what's possible." Outside the rescue center, news of the miracle family began to spread again. But this time the tone had changed. Videos of Emma wrestling playfully with her cubs, scolding them with mock growls, and nuzzling them to sleep went viral. Local news crews set up outside the gates, their stories filled with hope and wonder. Donations trickled in. Children sent drawings and letters, some addressed to Emma the best mom. Still, not everything was easy. Emma had to adapt, and so did the staff. She became fiercely protective of her new family. When unfamiliar volunteers approached the fence, she would stand between them and the cubs, her body tense, eyes sharp. The staff respected her boundaries, moving quietly and giving her space when she signaled discomfort. But the cubs were growing, and so were their appetites for adventure. One day, the largest cub slipped through a loose spot in the enclosure fence, dashing across the snowy yard. A flurry of panic followed. Volunteers ran, Olivia shouted. Ben grabbed a net. But it was Emma who saved the day. She let out a sharp, echoing yowl that froze the cub in his tracks. He crouched in the snow, trembling, until Emma stalked out, picked him up by the scruff, and carried him back inside. The lesson was simple. Out there in the wild, danger lurked. With each passing week, the cubs grew stronger, bolder. Emma played her part with unyielding patience. She led them in mock hunts, pouncing on stuffed toys and teaching them to move with silence and purpose. Sometimes, she'd let them win, rolling over in defeat as they leapt on her back. Other times, she'd dart away, forcing them to chase her, their little paws thudding on the frozen ground. For Olivia, these moments became more than research. They became a lifeline. She filmed Emma's transformation, capturing each milestone for the rescue community and beyond. Every new skill the cubs learned felt like a victory against the odds. A chapter in a story the world was finally ready to believe. At night, Olivia sometimes stayed late, sitting outside the enclosure with a mug of tea, the heat seeping into her tired hands. She watched as Emma curled protectively around the cubs, eyes soft, breath steady. She saw in Emma a mirror of her own hopes and doubts, a reminder that motherhood, in any form, was equal parts joy and fear. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and cast the sanctuary in a golden glow, Ben joined Olivia at the fence. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply watched as Emma cleaned her cubs, licking away the day's worries and troubles. "She's not just surviving anymore," Ben said quietly. "She's living for them." Olivia smiled, her voice thick with gratitude. And maybe, just maybe, they're living for her too. As darkness settled over Peaceful Valley, the world outside still churned with its debates and doubts. But inside the sanctuary, the only thing that mattered was the quiet miracle of a mother who chose to love, and the family she was making, one lesson at a time. By the time the first wildflowers dared to peek through the snow, Emma's cubs were nearly unrecognizable from the frail, half-blind kittens who'd been carried into Peaceful Valley. Their coats gleamed with health, muscles coiled beneath sleek fur, eyes bright with the unspent energy of youth. Emma, once haunted by pain and exile, now moved with a wary confidence, her limp less pronounced, her gaze softer but still vigilant. Spring meant change at the sanctuary, and with it came the hard conversations. The cubs' growth meant it was time to consider their future, not as permanent residents, but as true creatures of the wild. The Montana Department of Wildlife sent a field team to evaluate their progress, watching closely as Emma guided them through climbing drills and mock hunts, never letting them forget their natural instincts. The decision came on a warm morning, the air thick with birdsong and hope. Ben broke the news to the staff in the small break room, his voice gentle but unwavering. "They're ready. The biologists say the cubs can be candidates for the release program. They'll be transferred to the pre-release facility next week." He paused, looking around at the volunteers, then at Olivia, whose eyes glistened with pride and dread. Olivia tried to focus on the mission. After all, release was the goal. They'd saved these cubs so they could have a real chance at wild freedom. Still, the thought of saying goodbye to them, and to the family Emma had so painfully built, felt almost unbearable. For Emma, the shift was harder to explain, but she sensed it all the same. She became restless, pacing the fence long after dusk, her eyes searching the tree line. At feeding time, she grew more protective, gathering her cubs around her, almost as if she could shield them from whatever was coming next. The cubs, sensing her unease, clung closer, their games subdued, their curiosity mixed with confusion. The pre-release facility was located in a secluded valley deeper in the mountains, a place where the cubs would learn to hunt, avoid humans, and reacquire the last hard edges of wildness before being set free. The staff prepared the cubs for the move, but Olivia worried about Emma. Would she understand? Could she bear another loss after finally opening her heart again? The night before the transfer, Olivia stayed late, sitting on the cold ground outside Emma's enclosure, watching the Bobcat family under the faint glow of the moon. She whispered reassurances, knowing Emma couldn't understand the words, but hoping the tone, soft and steady, would comfort her. "Thank you, Emma," Olivia murmured, voice cracking. "You gave them everything, more than anyone believed you could." In the gray light of morning, the field team arrived with carriers and tranquilizer darts. Emma's anxiety grew palpable, her tail thrashing, eyes wild with suspicion. The cubs, sensing danger, hid in the farthest corner. The staff moved quickly, gently but firmly gathering the cubs and coaxing them into the carriers. Emma watched, tense and silent, as one by one her cubs disappeared behind metal doors. As the final cub was lifted, Emma let out a sound no one in the center would ever forget. A low, guttural wail, equal parts rage and grief, echoing off the trees. Olivia covered her mouth, tears burning her eyes. Even the most seasoned field biologist faltered, pausing to pay silent respect to the pain in that call. When the trucks pulled away, Emma pressed herself to the fence, her nose quivering, eyes fixed on the empty road. She circled the enclosure, searching for the cub's scent, calling softly into the silence. That night, for the first time, she didn't eat. She paced until exhaustion overcame her, then collapsed in the straw, her body curled tight as if to hold in the last remnants of warmth. In the days that followed, Emma's grief was visible and raw. She dragged their old toys to the far corner of the pen, burying her nose in the lingering scent. She spent hours scratching at the straw, then lying perfectly still, eyes open and unblinking. The staff watched her with heavy hearts, documenting what they realized was a kind of mourning, one few had ever witnessed in a wild cat. Olivia, feeling the loss as keenly as Emma, struggled with her own heartache. She spent her shifts checking on Emma, offering treats, speaking softly through the wire. Sometimes she'd find Emma staring into the woods, her gaze distant, as if waiting for her family to return on the wind. Release day for the cubs was bittersweet triumph. The field team radioed back. The cubs bolted from their carriers into the underbrush without hesitation, wildness and courage guiding their paws. The staff cheered and wiped away tears, comforted by the knowledge that the cubs were where they belonged. Still, the question lingered. Would Emma ever recover from this second, deeper exile? The answer came in small, gradual shifts. Over weeks, Emma's depression slowly eased. She began to show interest in the world again, first at the sound of birds, then at the sight of volunteers passing by, and finally, at the soft cries of other orphaned animals brought to Peaceful Valley. Olivia watched, hopeful, as Emma began to reclaim her place, not as a mother in mourning, but as a survivor, changed and scarred, yet still capable of hope. But that first night, as the Montana stars blazed above and the sanctuary lay quiet. Emma's grieving form in the straw told the truth no one wanted to face. Love, when chosen, comes with loss. And sometimes, the price of saving another is a heart left aching in the aftermath. In the weeks after the release, Peaceful Valley Rescue Center returned to its familiar rhythm, but nothing felt the same. There was a subtle hush that followed the staff as they walked the snowy paths, a new respect in their voices when they spoke of Emma. The story of the Bobcat who became a mother, and the cubs who ran wild and free, had touched everyone. None more so than Olivia, who found herself lingering by Emma's enclosure each evening, feeling the echo of that bittersweet goodbye. Emma had changed in ways that were hard to put into words. She moved more slowly, pausing often to sniff the straw or sit silently near the fence. She rarely played with her old toys, and her appetite came and went with the weather. Sometimes she would lift her head at a sudden sound, eyes alert with hope, only to sink back when it turned out to be a volunteer or the wind. For the first time, Olivia witnessed what she could only call grief in a wild animal, a weighty, solemn ache that hung about Emma's enclosure like morning fog. The other staff saw it too. Tomas, usually the first to crack a joke, brought fresh branches and feathers to try and tempt Emma's curiosity. Ben ordered new climbing logs, but Emma only sniffed them before curling up in her favorite spot. Olivia kept careful notes in her journal. Emma, restless, scratches at straw, then lays with eyes open, eating little, not aggressive, just empty. She sent updates to the board and the wider rescue community, who responded with a mixture of awe and concern. "This is unprecedented," wrote one wildlife biologist. "We speak of animal instinct, but perhaps we underestimate their capacity for attachment and for loss." Late one night, after the other volunteers had gone home, Olivia sat on a folding chair by Emma's fence, hands wrapped around a mug of cooling tea. The stars shimmered overhead, icy and sharp, as she tried to find words for her own tangled feelings. The cubs were gone, and the pen was silent. But Olivia still felt their presence everywhere, the echo of their squeaks, the imprint of their tiny paws in the straw. She thought about her own mother, a relationship that had grown distant and strained since Olivia left home to work at the rescue center. There had been fights about her career, her choices, even her stubborn heart. Now, watching Emma grieve with such raw honesty, Olivia wondered if it was time to reach out. Maybe pain was not just something to endure, but something that made love deeper and more real. So, on a rare afternoon off, Olivia sat at her kitchen table and wrote a letter. Pen to paper, no screens, no distractions. She poured out everything, the heartbreak of watching Emma say goodbye, the pride in seeing the cubs vanish into the wild, the slow, steady hope that lingered even in the hardest moments. "I thought I was saving them," she wrote, "but maybe I was learning how to let go. Maybe that's what love is, a willingness to open your heart, even when you know it might break. I miss you, Mom. I hope we can try again." That letter was the first of many. Each time Olivia wrote, she found a little more peace, and slowly, Emma seemed to do the same. One morning, as snow drifted past the windows, the staff brought in 2 new bobcat cubs, orphans found abandoned on the far side of the valley. They were younger than the first litter, their cries high-pitched and frantic, their bodies shivering with fear. Emma watched from her corner, wary and withdrawn. Olivia, heart in her throat, wondered if the old cat would accept them, or if her heart had closed for good. The staff debated what to do, whether to risk another introduction or to hand-raise the cubs. "Let's let her decide," Ben said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the last release. "If she doesn't want them, we'll step in. But if she does, let's give her a chance." So with trembling hands, Olivia placed the cubs in the straw at the far end of Emma's enclosure and stepped back, heart pounding. For long minutes, nothing happened. The cubs wailed, tumbling over each other in confusion. Emma turned her head, ears flicking, but did not move. The minutes stretched on, and Olivia's hope began to fade. Then, as if drawn by some invisible thread, Emma stood and limped toward the cubs. She sniffed them, circled, hesitated. The staff watched in breathless silence. Finally, Emma lowered herself to the straw and, tentative, aching but willing, curled her body around the tiny forms. She licked their heads once, twice, 3 times. The cubs quieted, burrowing into her warmth. Emma's eyes closed, and for the first time in weeks, her body relaxed in sleep. Olivia pressed her face to the wire, tears stinging her eyes, not of grief, but of overwhelming relief and pride. In that moment, she understood the lesson that Emma had been teaching her all along. Family isn't about blood. It's about who you choose and who chooses you back. Love means letting go and still daring to begin again. As the sun rose, filling the valley with pale gold light, Emma's new family slept in a tangled heap of fur and hope. Olivia scribbled in her journal, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Emma chose to love again. So will I. And in that fragile, beautiful morning, the world felt full of second chances. 5 years passed, and the world changed around Peaceful Valley Rescue Center. The Montana winters softened a little sooner each year. Summers grew lush and green, and a new generation of volunteers arrived, full of questions, hope, and stories they'd heard about the legendary Bobcat, who taught everyone what it meant to love and to let go. Emma became more than a resident at the sanctuary. She became its soul. Over the years, she raised 17 cubs, some orphaned, some brought in by rangers or local farmers who'd heard about the miracle mother. Some of the cubs were shy and clung to her for weeks, while others struck out boldly on their own as soon as their legs were strong enough. Some stayed close, visiting the fence from the other side of the trees even after their release, and some melted into the wild, leaving only a memory and a paw print in the hearts of those who cared for them. For the staff, Emma was a living lesson, her legacy woven into every decision they made. Ben, now gray at the temples but no less sharp, led school tours past her enclosure, recounting the story of her first orphans and the risks the center had taken. He spoke not just about wildlife biology, but about trust, patience, and the strength it took to believe in the impossible. "Emma taught us that hope is always worth the risk," he'd say, leaning over the fence as 3 new cubs tumbled around the old Bobcat's feet. "She showed us that being broken doesn't mean you're finished. Sometimes it means you're just beginning something no one else can see." Olivia became the sanctuary's outreach director, running programs for local schools and fielding calls from researchers around the world. Her friendship with Ben grew into something like family, and her letters to her mother became calls and then visits, each one healing old wounds a little more. She told Emma's story in classrooms and documentaries, sharing the footage of that first trembling embrace, the heartbreak of release, and the quiet, powerful act of choosing love despite the cost. One spring afternoon, a film crew arrived to make a documentary about Emma's legacy. The producer asked Olivia, "What makes this cat so special?" Olivia watched Emma basking in the sun, 3 new cubs curled at her side, their eyes half closed in trust. "She didn't have to love them," Olivia answered softly. "She could have stayed closed off, safe in her own world. But again and again, she opened her heart, even knowing it might break. That's what makes her a mother, Not just instinct, but the choice to love what isn't yours, and to let go when it's time. Emma was older now. Her fur had silvered around her face, and her limp was more pronounced in the cold. Yet there was a regal calm in the way she moved, a quiet dignity that drew visitors and volunteers alike. Sometimes, Olivia would find her staring at the fence line, as if watching for a familiar shape in the woods. Other times, the younger bobcats would press close, listening as she chuffed low warnings or taught them to pounce, her patience undimmed by age. On the 5th anniversary of the first rescue, Peaceful Valley held a celebration in Emma's honor. Families from nearby towns brought their children, teachers brought their classes, and some of the earliest cubs, now adults, wild and wary, were glimpsed at the edge of the trees. Ben gave a speech at sunset, his voice unsteady as he looked at Emma lying in the straw, the 3 newest cubs dozing at her belly. "She didn't just save those cubs," he said. "She saved us too. She reminded us that family is built every day, out of the choices we make and the love we dare to give. We honor her tonight as the mother that chose. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. That's what makes all the difference." As the sky deepened to indigo, lanterns were lit around the sanctuary, and people shared stories of Emma's miracles, of the time she stayed awake 3 days with a sick cub, of how she taught the volunteers to see every animal as an individual, not just a case number. The new volunteers, inspired by her legacy, vowed to carry her lessons forward. Later, as the crowds left and the stars returned to the Montana sky, Olivia sat quietly by Emma's enclosure. The old bobcat looked up, her eyes steady and bright. Olivia smiled through tears, her heart full of gratitude. "You did it, Em," she whispered. "You showed us what matters." Inside the enclosure, Emma rested in the moonlight, 3 cubs tucked against her side, their breathing slow and sure. For a moment, everything was silent. The fences, the fields, the woods beyond. The world felt gentle and safe, as if all the heartbreaks, all the losses, had led here to this patch of light and warmth and hope. And as the sanctuary drifted to sleep, Emma's story lingered in the air, a quiet, unbreakable promise. No matter how many times your heart is broken, you open it again and again and again, because that's what saves the world.